Good morning, everybody. My name is Dick Walker, Dr. Dick Walker, Richard Walker. I'm coming to you live from Spokane, Washington. It is Saturday, August the 6th, 2022, and I'm going to be sharing with you the science of redox and the science of specifically of Asea Redox. So hopefully you'll learn something useful here and something you can share, or at least have a basic understanding about how redox works and how it applies to Asea. So let's get started. So in case you don't know who I am, I've been a physician for many years. I've been involved with Asea for about 9 years. I serve on the medical professional board. I obviously am an educator, entrepreneur, have a successful Asea business. And in the past, I've done a lot of high altitude mountain climbing, mountains like Everest, etc. And hopefully I've gained a sufficient understanding of redox and Asea that I can impart to you a little bit more information about what it is and how this works, so that you have a foundation for understanding Asea. If you want more information than what I'm giving you today, here's a couple sources. So you may want to take a screenshot of this slide. If you're looking for information on strictly the science of redox and redox signaling, PubMed.gov is a great source. That's the National Institute of Health library. And if you want information specifically on the science of Asea Redox and the scientific studies that Asea has done in clinical trials, go to www.aseascience.com. If you're looking for testimonial data and some examples of what Asea Redox has done for people, there's a couple of sites you can go to: redoxexperiences.com, password there is associates with a capital A, or realredoxresults.com, password there is redox. So certainly take a screenshot of this if you want to investigate this beyond what we're talking about today. And there's a couple of Facebook sites that can be useful: Asea Healthy Self, which is also loaded with information, Asea United, and there are a few others most of you, I think, are aware of. If you really want to read a book about redox science, I love Lee Osler's book, Redox Matters. You can get that at redoxmatters.com. And that's also where this recording will be posted within a day or two. And if you are visiting this as a guest, then talk to the person who introduced you and directed you to this presentation. Or go to amazingmolecules.com to learn more about the science, the business, and the technology. So this is Asea headquarters. It's located in Pleasant Grove, Utah. This is where all of this information stems from, the Asea science part of it. And it's a company that I've been affiliated with now for 9 years. But let's get into the science of redox. Why is redox important? Well, why do you eat food? Why do you drink water? Why do you breathe oxygen? Well, it's because they're all essential for life. Redox signaling molecules fit that mode as well. And all of these elements are essential to life, but some are more immediately needed than others, but none is less important than the other. The biggest difference is that our cells can actually utilize the basic ingredients of life to create redox signaling molecules. And we're going to be talking about those naturally produced redox molecules as we talk about the science. But even though your cells are capable of making redox signaling molecules, many times we have deficiencies or imbalances for a number of different reasons, aging being one. Oftentimes disease and injury can use them up at a faster pace than our cells can make. Oxygen is closely related to redox signaling molecules, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But redox is all about moving electrons around from one molecule to another. And as it turns out, oxygen is the primary acceptor of these electrons. We'll talk about the Krebs cycle a little bit and about fuel utilization and how redox molecules are created. So the foundation for healthy cells is really redox signaling molecules. They're an absolute requirement for healthy functional cells of all types. Doesn't matter whether it's a heart cell, liver cell, lung cell, skin cell, redox signaling molecules and redox signaling, the activity involved, is a foundation for cellular metabolism. Cellular dysfunction is the root cause of all illness, so it's important to make sure that the foundation of cellular health is working. And redox interventions, I want you to understand, work best upstream from problems. They work best when we're using them to prevent metabolic breakdown and metabolic problems that lead to disease. However, at any stage, even if someone has already developed significant problems in part due to redox deficiencies, restoring redox homeostasis with an external source of redox molecules can really help our cells to do a better job of repairing and replacing damaged cells, which is really the most important activity for most of us when we think of redox signaling. And redox homeostasis and signaling are essential for maximizing our cellular health. Without being able to unleash the energy that's stored in food, however, in our cells, life would not exist. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the biochemical foundations for life are about the movement of electrons from one molecule to another and the utilization of the energy that is released along with the production of these redox molecules that are created in that process of metabolism. I do want to make sure that all of you understand that Asea Redox is not a pharmaceutical, it's not a drug, and nothing that I say during this presentation should be construed to mean that Asea Redox is a cure or treatment for any disease or condition. It is simply restoring a source of molecules that are naturally produced in the body, they're native to the body, and just bio-replenishing those molecules to give our cells a bit of extra molecules to utilize. Asea supplies those additional redox molecules so that we can use them, our cells can use them to enhance the actions that naturally occurring redox molecules provide. So let's get real basic here. What is life? Because you really have to understand the basics to understand what redox is all about. But life is nothing more, or absolutely, I shouldn't minimize this at all. It's a continuous complex series of molecular interactions. And most of us don't think of life that way, but indeed that's the foundation of life. These molecules are vibrating, gyrating, bumping around. If you could look under an electron microscope and look at a bunch of living cells or inside of these living cells, there's a bunch of activity going on in it. It seemingly looks to be random and haphazard, like a chemical stew, like the mosh pit at a concert. But it is ruled by a complex genetic code or roadmap, and it's governed by the natural laws of molecular chemistry and physics and redox, the gaining and losing of electrons. And that's what we're going to talk about more this morning. But how does life occur? What is regulating all of this, what looks like chaotic stuff going on in milliseconds inside of our cells? What brings order and function and life to this chaos? To understand that, we have to start to understand life at a molecular level. And the human body is made up of atoms that form molecules of different types. Molecules as building blocks for our cells, molecules as biochemistry, providing function, creating ATP, enabling life, molecules for information processing. And that's what we'll be talking about to a significant degree this morning. Molecules for communication in and between cells. Molecules as the foundation for healthy cells. Think of molecules as multifunctional entities that we really can't see without the use of some very sophisticated tools. All of this biochemistry without effective coordination and control just wouldn't work the way it needs to so that we can be healthy. So what's the answer to providing that control, that function? It's really information, communication, and coordination. We'll talk a little bit about what we call cellular adaptation, because without adaptation, there is no life. Scientific term for that is hormesis. And redox communication via redox signaling molecules is hugely important in establishing hormesis. To keep us alive and healthy, our cells process more information on a continuous, instantaneous basis without conscious input than the most complex computer ever invented. All of this miraculously goes on without us even knowing it, as long as we provide the necessary tools. So what is redox signaling? What is redox communication? Well, it's a scientifically documented mechanism of cellular communication that's essential to the functions of physiology and health. It's key to coordinating this huge range of biochemistry and physiologic processes, both inside and between all of our cells. Using redox signaling molecules to sustain order and the adaptive response necessary for health and wellness. The molecular condition in our cells are constantly changing, leading to fluctuation level of oxidative stress. And this requires ongoing adaptation and modulation to sustain homeostasis. That's essentially what we mean when we talk about hormesis. It's a dynamic environment. It's never standing still. And that process of hormesis really emphasizes the importance of redox communication. So how does life happen? How do our lives happen? Well, let's talk just for a second about bioenergetics, because what happens is that the sun's energy is utilized by plants to manufacture carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, and they get stored in those plants, and then we use those in the form of food to supply fuel to our mitochondria, these little power plants within our cells, so that they can use those fuel sources to produce ATP energy, as well as reactive oxygen species, which are mostly redox signaling molecules. So what happens is that we eat food, and those sources of food energy enter the mitochondria in a number of different ways as fatty acids, glycogen, amino acids, and they enter into what's called the Krebs cycle. Now, don't freak out. If you're a medical professional, you've all seen this in some sort of class when you were going through pre-med, haven't probably looked at it since, and you don't really have to understand the intricacies of the Krebs cycle. But over on the right-hand side, you'll see a cascade of molecular interactions. It's called the electron transport chain, where electrons are transferred from one molecule, one food-based molecule, to another. And each time that happens, ATP, which is cellular energy, is produced. And remember, we talked about how important oxygen was. It's important and essential to life because oxygen is the final acceptor of these electrons. And without that, this electron chain that produces all of our cellular energy breaks down and doesn't work. So oxygen is very essential to maintaining this electron transport chain. The other very important product of this process is the creation of redox signaling molecules, most of which are reactive oxygen species, ROS. So let's a little bit of an explanation of these redox reactions. Redox is nothing more than reduction oxidation. Oxidation is the loss of an electron. Reduction is the gain of electron. So when an oxygen molecule picks up an extra electron, that's oxidation. When the molecule that gave that electron to the oxygen in the process of creating ATP is reduced. Cellular respiration, as opposed to breathing, which is how most of us think of respiration, is a redox process using oxygen in the mitochondria to produce energy and carbon dioxide, which we breathe out as a waste product, water, as well as reactive oxygen species, and that's why oxygen is so essential. As the bonds between those molecules are broken, ATP is produced, as well as reactive oxygen species, which are used in the body as redox signaling molecules. And essentially, as we get to Asea Redox, that's what's in the big blue bottle. All of this is supported by science. Here's an example of a article that I pulled from PubMed.gov talking about reactive oxygen species, homeostasis or hormesis, and redox regulation in cellular signaling. And it talks about the necessity of these molecules to communicate information within our cells, to control and to make sure that all of this biochemistry happens in the way it's supposed to. But you may be saying, Dr. Walker, what kind of molecules are we talking about? So for example, on the top level of this slide, talking about the various modes of communication within our cells, there's some examples of redox signaling molecules: superoxides, hydrogen peroxide, hypochlorous acid, nitric oxide. There are a number of these, probably as many as 18 or 20 of them, that the body uses in one way or another for redox communication. And although there are other communication modes, we're going to talk about transcription factors because those are intimately related and function only because of redox signaling. But there's cytokines and chemokines and hormones and other neurotransmitters. But understand that these other communication systems all work at their foundation due to an effective and necessary supply of redox signaling molecules for that vital process of cellular communication. So here's another article that I pulled off PubMed, an overview of mechanisms of redox signaling in our cells. I'm not going to read through the abstract. You can certainly go to pubmed.gov and pull a number of articles like this, but look down in the lower left-hand corner and see that this is reference number 19 of 34,427 abstracts dealing with reactive oxygen species, dealing with redox signaling, dealing with essentially with Asea ultimately. So there's a lot of science that underlies what we're talking about here today. So let's look at health and physiology, the hierarchy of health and physiology, the hierarchy of our healthy cells. Certainly we have our body, which is made up of organs and tissues, which are made up of cells. So cells are what makes our body work. It's the common denominator building block. But underneath that are cellular processes and metabolic pathways that keep the cells alive and healthy. And underlying that is the DNA and genetics that supply the blueprint for everything that goes on in our body. And underneath that is the concept of epigenetics and the control of utilizing all of these DNA blueprints. And really that's a place where redox signaling is so important. But if you have healthy cells, you'll have a healthy body, and redox principles are essential for providing this health pyramid with the ingredients that it needs. We really have to pay particular attention to those foundations. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. We'll see later that redox sensitive reactions play major roles in this health pyramid, especially at the foundation. So a little bit more about redox signaling. Genes give life-sustaining instructions to our cells to carry out to keep us alive and healthy. That's called genetic expression. So it doesn't help you much if you have genes and the genetic blueprint unless that information can be expressed and utilized by the cell. That involves transcription factors that are essential for genetic expression, and they are under redox control. With age, cellular communication breaks down, signal weaken, gene expression is disrupted when epigenetic pathways are affected adversely. Maintaining redox balance helps to ensure the integrity of redox cellular communication. Genes may not determine your destiny, but epigenetic control over genetic pathways or genetic instructions certainly play a major role in that area. Epigenetics determine which programs, which DNA, which gene programs are needed to respond to changing conditions in the cell in order to function and provide hormesis, in order to help facilitate that adaptation that's necessary for cellular survival, cellular repair, cellular replacement, which all determines the level of our wellness as well as our lifespan. What's in that blue bottle that we call Asea Redox? Don't ever think of it as salt water. That's the basic ingredient for manufacturing redox signaling molecules that Asea uses. But what exactly is Asea Redox? Well, it's a proprietary and patented combination of redox signaling molecules maintained in a reactive state. These molecules have to be native and reactive. They have to be able to interact, and formulated specifically to optimize the physiologic signaling effects of redox molecules on cell interactions. And it's that reactive state that's so important, that really has made Asea such an important ingredient, such an important supplement for us to help maintain that hormetic response. Because these molecules can exist in active and inactive states, and that they have to be reactive in order to function. And having a mixture of redox signaling molecules maintained in the reactive state is a wee bit tricky. It's a biotech product produced and protected by both patents and trade secrets, designed to replenish bioidentical redox signaling molecules safely and effectively. So that's what's in the blue bottle. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between maintaining and supporting your health naturally or depending on drugs and medical interactions. Health, how do we define health? Well, we can define it as nothing more than the absence of disease, but there's really more involved there, isn't there? In Western medicine, health is a bunch of symptoms, controlling symptoms by trying to control in specific ways certain problems that develop. The importance is early detection, risk factor management, and then treatment. Spending a lot of money many times to try to identify a problem, which oftentimes they aren't able to do. How many of you are that are healthcare professionals often just can't make a specific diagnosis, and yet the patient is obviously not healthy? The root cause of all of these problems is at the cellular level, and oftentimes at the cellular communication level. Preventing, addressing, and reversing metabolic and mitochondrial dysfunction is really the holy grail of true health and true cellular health. When someone has a symptom, they either have cells that are not doing what they were designed and supposed to do, or they're doing something that they're not intended to do. So really, health means that your cells are doing what they were designed to do and not doing something abnormal or harmful. And that really is, I think, a much better definition of health. Repairing and eliminating damaged, dysfunctional cells is the best solution. Fixing that cell, thereby fixing the body. And that's what our body uses our redox signal, the naturally produced redox signaling molecules for, as well as the supplemental ones that they can get in the Asea. So let's look at this in a little more diagrammatic way. When your cells have oxidative balance, that essentially means, in simple terms, that there are equal numbers of oxidants and antioxidants being produced in your cell so that you have homeostasis or hormetic balance. When that gets out of balance and you have excessive production of oxidants versus antioxidants, that is oxidative stress. And what happens is that's like a fire. You can think of that as like a fire in your cells. Think of oxidative stress as inflammation, or the potential for inflammation if not corrected through a redox regulatory circuit. Problems develop that increase oxidative stress, disrupting that homeostasis. That results in a signal being sent. The signal being sent in this example to the fire truck. The signal being sent that we need help here. We need to stabilize and bring the cell back into metabolic balance, back into a balanced production of oxidants and reductants, oxidants and antioxidants. And so the cell identifies that problem and starts to effect a solution. In this example, the fire truck gets sent to put out the fire in the house. Redox signaling molecules and many redox sensitive switches. These are chemical or physiologic reactions or switches, often at multiple levels, are needed to accomplish the fix for excessive oxidative stress. It's not as simple as calling the fire truck. Let's use a car as an example of this hormesis so that you can maybe better understand this redox regulatory circuit. Problem might be low oil in the car, in the engine. And so we detect that when the pressure light goes on. There's a mechanism for communicating when the oil light flashes or the check engine light, for example. That's the signal that there's a problem with the car, just like our cell sends out signals using redox signaling molecules, perhaps, and we'll show you an example of that. But in the cell, each of these steps involves a series of redox sensitive switches that cause certain responses that eventually bring about a solution. So we have the problem, we have the detection of that problem, which involves redox signaling and communication, and then we have the problem solution, the adaptation to that problem, the hormetic process, which is an ongoing process at the cellular level. So we can think of redox signaling molecules as adaptogens, as helping the body to adapt to changes that, if left unchecked or not repaired, can really lead to problems. And facilitating that adaptation in a constantly changing environment is very complex. And I don't hope to be able to explain all of that to you. Just understand that this is going on at the foundation of cellular health at the molecular level. So there's no single example of a redox-dependent regulatory circuit essential to life and health. There are many of these redox circuits going on constantly within your cells. There are multitudes of examples, but we'll look at one of these, a well-understood one, so that you understand the foundational principles of how redox signaling and redox molecules are involved. We'll talk about the redox control of energy production in our cells, without which we cease to exist. Remember those pictures I showed you of bioenergetics, where plants store the energy that ultimately comes from the sun, and our cells access that stored energy, and that's what we call bioenergetics. And so let's look a little bit at that. A signaling event might be fasting or starvation, which results in decreased energy production. How does our body detect that that's going on? Well, you get hungry. But there's a lot of physiology that goes on to cause that hunger response. Those are sensors and cellular communication that ultimately signal the brain to tell us that we need to find some energy, we need to find some food. And those are done through redox signaling that affects certain redox sensitive switches within our cells that create various transcription factors that then go and grab the genetic blueprint necessary to take that food, which our brain has told our body to consume, and turn that into ATP energy. So that's essentially the bioenergetic process overview of how our body uses these redox signaling molecules to help our cells stay alive. One of perhaps millions of redox regulatory circuits in our body. So hormesis, stress, adaptation, stress. That's the story of our life at the cellular level. Our cells are constantly being stressed. And hormesis is an adaptive response of biological systems to moderate environmental or self-imposed challenges or stresses in order to improve the functionality or tolerance to more severe challenges. So the more we exercise our regulatory circuits, the better off our cells are at handling challenges. For example, starvation. Adaptation is to switch fuel sources from carbs to fats and proteins. If you don't have a food source, your body needs to access the energy stored in our fat in our body. Adaptation is to switch from carbs to fats. It brings fatty acids and ketones from the stored fat to fuel our cells, most importantly in our brain and muscles, needed for what we call the fight or flight response. Redox sensitive switches make this adaptation possible. It's called nutritional ketosis, where our body says, wow, you're not giving me enough food. I don't have any carbohydrates, fats, or proteins to digest. So we're going to go grab some fat molecules from the storeroom. And all of us have a lot of energy stored in our body in various places as lipids. As we exercise that hormetic pathway of burning fat for fuel, it improves the adapting bioenergetics of our metabolic processes. And we can change and naturally enhance things through that process for athletic performance. An athlete gets far more ATP energy from fat than it does from eating carbohydrates. So supplementing with the Asea Redox facilitates this adaptation without having to fully deplete our stored glucose or glycogen. So it's an adaptive process that can actually help athletes. And we have a study that actually shows that that happens. So what are some of the other benefits of nutritional ketosis? They're multiple. And again, this is only one example of redox communication at work. And I'm using this as an example because it's quite well understood. We go into nutritional ketosis every night when we sleep because we're not constantly providing food for our body to digest and metabolize at night. But the benefits of nutritional ketosis are very significant. And it's naturally triggered and modulated by redox signaling. It's a redox-driven cellular repair process. So nutritional ketosis contributes to overall wellness. It contributes to anti-aging. It helps metabolic disorders. It helps neurodegenerative disorders, and I'll show you an article about an example of that. It helps in traumatic brain injury recovery. It helps deal with excessive weight issues. If you can turn on your body's fat-burning mechanisms, then it's certainly easier to manage if you have excessive energy stored in the form of lipids. It also definitely improves athletic performance, endurance, and recovery. As mentioned, it occurs naturally during sleep, fasting, and exercise, but we have a biohack here because we can use redox signaling molecules, and I'm going to show you how that works in a bit, to actually facilitate this process. Look at this list. There are so many benefits that I would wonder, why don't we all start to understand nutritional ketosis and use this for overall health and longevity. The brain appears to do particularly well when we supply it with the breakdowns of fat metabolism. And the study done by Torre Labs for Asea indicates a positive influence of redox signaling molecules on what we call brain-derived neurotrophic factors, a transcription factor that benefits the brain. It's intriguing that research has identified abnormalities in redox-sensitive metabolic pathways in the brain that occur more than 10 years prior to the onset of dementia. So in other words, they have now identified breakdowns in redox sensitive metabolism in folks that eventually develop dementia, and they can identify these things years before any clinical signs of dementia develop. So is our diet important in connection with redox? Absolutely. Is lifestyle important? Absolutely. And we'll pull all of that together as we progress through this presentation. Are there any athletes on this on the Zoom today? Because if there are, this is important information. Anyone in this room who has problems managing body weight, this is important information. Obesity is rampant and dangerous. The energy released by redox allows athletes to achieve their dreams of peak performance. The creation of ATP is redox dependent. Reactive oxygen species, i.e. redox signaling molecules, mediate oxidative stress, stimulating adaptive hormetic responses, maximizing the cell's metabolic flexibility. So in the absence of a food source, we start to burn those fats for energy with the multiple benefits that I already mentioned. There are thousands of scientific references pertaining to redox health. Why is this important to you? We have a study that showed that Asea is empowering athletes by improving endurance, strength, recovery, mental stamina. But that's not just for athletes. That's for any of us that would like to improve those properties of our health. That study, the study that Dr. Neiman did years ago, showed that drinking Asea, and this was done in endurance athletes, bicycle riders specifically, and it showed a shift in 43 of over 500 metabolites that they were looking at. And they indicated a mobilization of fatty acids. It also indicated a sparing of muscle glycogen, which is stored carbohydrates, and mice that were supplemented with the Asea Redox in concentrations achievable in human beings achieved a 29% increase in endurance and achieved metabolic or nutritional ketosis. So this is an important aspect of long-term health, and we can biohack this system using supplemental redox signaling molecules to encourage our bodies to engage in nutritional ketosis and burn stored fat. So let's talk a bit about transcription factors and epigenetics, because this is a place where redox signaling molecules are very active. What are transcription factors? Well, they're molecules that when activated, they signal and control genetic transcription and genetic expression. So they are necessary for pulling the information out of our DNA library, pulling out the blueprints that our cells need for specific activities and endpoints. They bind to specific DNA sequences or regions, enabling access to those genetic instructions via the epigenetic pathways that we talked about earlier. There are many, many transcription factors. Some examples are that brain-derived neurotrophic factor that I talked about earlier, vascular endothelial growth factor, which is important in cancer, interferon A and B, NR3C, and we're going to talk a bit about NF-kappa B and NRF2. These are factors that act to bring about the adaptive changes that we're talking about in hormesis. They're required to regain homeostasis. They're required to repair cellular damage. They're required to replace damaged and aging cells, which is so important to controlling disease and the aging process. Activation of these transcription factors in part explains why Asea Redox works. Their role in genetic expression is pivotal in controlling oxidative stress. They are the foundation of protecting cells from damage due to excessive oxidation. They're the foundation for detecting damage and facilitating repair, and they're the foundation for replacing dysfunctional cells that simply are doing bad things or not doing what they're supposed to do and need to go away and be replaced with the new normal cells. So adapting to oxidative stress, which is an excessive production of oxidants or reactive oxygen species, which are redox signaling molecules, but which also can be harmful in stealing electrons from other molecules. Important in this process are two transcription factors, NF-kappa B and NRF2, very important factors in the protective function of redox signaling. Again, this is only one example of redox control of transcription factors, and there are many, many others that are essential to life. But both of these transcription factors can bring about increased production of some very important naturally produced antioxidants called glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. NF-kappa B can activate this increased production, but it is a consequence of increased levels of oxidative stress. So if you're relying on the NF-kappa B transcription factor, first you have to have a fire. First, the cells have to demonstrate that they are being stressed in that oxidative way, too many oxidants and not enough antioxidants. So NF-kappa B transcription factor is a reactive mechanism to deal with the problem that is already developed. NRF2, on the flip side, is a proactive transcription factor that, when activated, causes the cell to produce more antioxidants without having to go through the fire alarm and all of the smoke and problems that are inherent in cellular oxidative stress, or that fire, that inflammation. So here you see two different pathways. Redox signaling molecules control these different factors in a way that is very important to overall health. So you can see where redox, this is in a normal cell, and you can see that the normal redox signaling molecules, the native ones that are produced in the cell, come into play to encourage the transcription factor NRF2 without having to have the cytokines and the chemokines that are produced during oxidative stress. So it's a much kinder and gentler way of dealing through the prevention of those problems by increasing our native production of those three very important antioxidants. So that's how our cells do this with the molecule, with the redox signaling molecules that they produce within the cell. But what this indicates is how a cell undergoing oxidative stress responds in order to reestablish oxidative balance. So you have what we're going to talk in a minute about what we call the redox rheostat. How does the cell deal with increased oxidative stress, which is at the top of this, coming out of the mitochondria? Too many reactive oxygen species, too much oxidants, not enough antioxidants. How does it deal with this? How does it know how to deal with this? Here we have what we call the redox rheostat. On the right is high oxidative stress, high distress, a fire in the cell, inflammation, high oxidation levels, low ATP, and what can happen ultimately is cellular damage and death. That's where NF-kappa B comes into play if the cell gets into this problem. On the other side of this redox rheostat, we have a low oxidative stress, high ATP production, homeostasis or hormesis in cell proliferation. That's because NRF2 is the transcription factor that is coming into play. And the oxidative state of the cell determines which transcription factor our cell uses. Essentially, we have one of these redox regulatory circuits. The problem is oxidation. The detection is NRF2, and KEAP2 is just a ligand that attaches to NRF2. I'm not going to go into that. The communication is the translocation of genes and genetic expression and the development of an antioxidant defense. So what's very important to understand, and we've shown this in a study that was done, is that supplementing and giving the cells an external source of redox signaling molecules, you can see it coming in from the left-hand side from the big blue bottle, we're giving the cell an external source of redox signaling molecules, which encourages the production of NRF2 transcription factor by supplementing with these biooxidative, and we get what we call biooxidative enhancement. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. but it encourages the mitochondria during diet and exercise, for example, to increase the production of NRF2 and therefore increase the production of those beneficial antioxidants. I'd like to point out in this cell also that many of the things that we do to get healthy and stay healthy that we've known about for years actually work through this same mechanism by encouraging the mitochondria to produce more redox signaling molecules. But we've figured out a way to essentially hack the system by supplying an external source of these redox signaling molecules. So redox signaling molecules directly activate NRF2 and improve our antioxidant defenses, bringing about an increase in those antioxidants and cut down on and eliminate to a great degree the production of cytokines and damaging chemicals that are produced if NF-kappa B has to be utilized to improve our antioxidant defenses. And it's important to understand the interaction here, because by hacking the system and giving our cells extra redox signaling molecules, we're pushing the cell in a healthy way to produce these antioxidants without having to become inflamed first. So what do we mean by, what are all of these biooxidative therapies enhance our oxidative defenses? And we're talking about things like ozone therapy, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, nutritional, nutraceuticals, herbs, vitamin D, photonic therapy, fasting, and caloric restriction. All of these biooxidative therapies actually work by encouraging our cells to produce more redox signaling molecules, the very thing that is in redox, our redox supplement. So redox supplementation, bioreplenishing with redox molecules, works in the same way as all of these beneficial biooxidative therapies and lifestyle things that we've known for years are healthy, but we didn't really understand why. And now we've got a pretty good understanding that they work through this hormetic process, encouraging our cells to overproduce or produce more redox signaling molecules. And we can now hack that system by essentially drinking Asea Redox. So Asea actually has a study to prove that supplementing with Asea Redox actually does affect transcription factors. So when you're doing a study, first you ask a question, a hypothesis, so to speak. So what was the question that the scientists asked to design this study that I'm going to explain to you? Well, the question was, could consuming Asea Redox have epigenetic effects on cells? And could that explain the observed results that we see? And if so, could it possibly identify certain patterns of epigenetic influence attributable to supplementing with Asea Redox? And how long would those improvements or how long would those changes last? So why would we want to look into that? Well, because the science shows us that cellular redox really is influential in epigenetics and in disease. Here's a couple of different studies. Cellular redox, epigenetics, and disease. Redox regulation of genome stability by effects on gene expression, epigenetic pathways, and DNA damage and repair. The redox basis of epigenetic modifications from mechanisms to functional consequences. So what did this study look like? Well, they took a group of 35-year-olds, about 60 of them, and they divided them into one group that drank Asea and another group that didn't. And they did that for, I believe, 6 weeks, and then they looked to see if there were any changes in gene expression, and if so, in what areas. A complex thing to look at, but the tools are available to do that. So essentially, it was an attempt to show that bioreplenishment with redox signaling molecules makes a difference in how our cells operate. How do we know that bioreplenishment with active stable redox molecules can directly stimulate increases in NRF2 activation? Research showed that redox signaling was involved in this process, but would Asea Redox have an impact? What they found was that the results of this study showed that there were improvements in 5 different areas that involved transcription and epigenetics: innate immune system pathways, inflammatory pathways, vascular health pathways, digestive enzyme pathways, hormone modulation pathways. These are all pathways that have significant impacts on a significant number of people. Your first line of defense against infection is your immune system. Your last line is the ICU and a ventilator. So why not supplement with something that has been shown to improve our innate immune system? Controlling inflammation is something very important, certainly in aging and anti-aging. Inflammation is the leading cause of death in the US. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the US. Anything that might help our cells to protect themselves against this would be important, right? So we saw gene expression changes in a number of genes, but the ones that were most statistically significant were these 5. And I'm going to look at one of these genetic pathways just to show you, for example, what happened. What we found was that by improving and up-regulating the EGR1 pathway, there were effects on insulin sensitivity. There were effects on a number of different things like serotonin support, neuron and synaptic support, antioxidants, which we've been talking about, vascular health, hormone modulation, insulin signaling, immune system issues, transcription factor gene expression issues. All of these were impacted by this one pathway, which was positively affected by supplementing with the Asea Redox. By the way, these study subjects took 8 ounces of Asea a day. So this one pathway gene influences many, many aspects of our health. Again, looking at the redox lifestyle, exercise, good nutrition, paying attention to what we eat and when we eat it, all of these things have an effect on our redox homeostasis, our redox control, our redox rheostat. Why is redox important? Redox signaling molecules are an absolute requirement for healthy functional cells. Redox biology is the foundation of cellular metabolism. Cellular dysfunction is the root cause of all illness. Redox interventions work best when started early. Redox signaling is essential to maximizing our cellular health, and redox powers the potential for enhancing our lives in multiple ways. Let's talk a little bit about cellular aging, because it happens to be the most common risk factor for all chronic disease. It's all about living healthier longer. It's all about living healthier longer by following the rules of our cells and learning to follow them consistently, extending what I call our health span. Who wants to expand a lifespan that's miserable in ill health? We're talking about extending a healthy life, an enjoyable life, a productive life. Just think of the many benefits. Let me just show you an example of what can happen when someone supplements with redox signaling molecules. This woman started that supplementation at age 84. Within 7 weeks, you can already see some positive changes in the way she looks on her face. A lot of this was due to Renew 28, the topical application of redox signaling molecules, but certainly drinking them contributed to this as well. And you can see over the next 8 years that this woman certainly looks happier. I think she looks younger. I know from communication with people who know this woman that she feels younger and healthier. So here we have what appears to be some anti-aging benefits attributable to bioenergetics and replacement of redox signaling molecules. Certainly, we've got some other examples of that. You can see the reduction in wrinkling on these two pictures, certainly an anti-aging sort of response in the skin that our body was able to effectuate after supplementing with redox signaling molecules. I'm not claiming that we're curing aging. What I'm showing you is what different bodies have done when supplemented with both topical and internal increases in redox signaling molecules. You can see that scar that essentially went away, those age spots, which were resolved. You can see a couple of different anti-aging pictures there, but we also have science to back it up. When we studied what happens with topical application of redox signaling molecules, the figures were pretty impressive. And simply by supplying a concentrated form of redox molecules to the skin, we showed improvements in wrinkle depth, smoothness, elasticity, moisture. I think that the most powerful anti-aging discovery of our lifetime is Asea Redox. I think this is the science that's going to change the world, because if we can essentially give our body a tool that it can use to turn back many of the negative effects of aging in the environment, then we have a powerful tool that we can use to keep people healthier and happier. Because aging, quite frankly, and chronic inflammation are a new branch of science. Age-related research into immunosenescence, the loss of redox balance and homeostasis with advancing age, chronic low-grade inflammation is a highly significant risk factor in morbidity and mortality. And it appears that by supplying an extra source of redox molecules, that we can give the body a tool that it can use to help to negate some of these changes. The science is there: oxidative stress and chronic lung disease. So we know that oxidative stress is an important factor, not just in lung problems, but with all kinds of other problems that become more common with advancing age. Reactive oxygen species in inflammation and lung disease. Aging impairs cellular communication. Age-related decrease in redox signaling contributes to increases in disease. Our body simply loses the ability or what happens is, as we age, our mitochondria become less efficient. They become not as well at producing energy, and they don't do as good a job at producing redox molecules. So we see a decreasing ability to control all of this biochemistry. We see a decrease in epigenetic signaling. We see a decrease in the ability to repair cellular damage, to replace damaged cells, decrease in the levels of autophagy needed to rid our cells of accumulated debris and waste. And we see a decrease in immune protection from infections and cancer as we get older. And much of this is related to a decrease in our redox health. Redox signaling in neurotransmission and cognition during aging, certainly a common problem. Remember, I mentioned that they can find changes in redox balance in people up to a number of years prior to the development of cognition issues in human beings. Redox biology and neurologic function, dysfunction, and aging. Redox signaling in skeletal muscle, the role of aging and exercise. Redox signaling, neuroinflammation, and neurodegeneration. Cellular aging, is it inevitable? I'll ask you that. Can specific nutritional ingredients acting through redox signaling pathways influence cell performance to help counteract the effects of aging? It's all about living healthier longer, not just about living longer, and determining how certain phytonutrients and bioenergetic nutrients can counteract aging and extend health span. Just think of the many benefits. So let's draw this to a close by making some conclusions. Knowing what we know now, we can better appreciate the many problems that develop in the absence of redox homeostasis and hormesis. We can better understand that problems with redox cell signaling are a major cause of many, if not all, diseases. And we can now appreciate the huge array of potential benefits available from redox signaling bioreplenishment by giving our cells a tool that they can use to bring about an enhanced level of wellness. There are many, many, many sources of information out there dealing with redox signaling and its effect on health. 6 Nobel Prizes in the last 10 years have been given to scientists that are working in this area of redox signaling. So again, if you want more information than I've given you today, take a screenshot of these sources and go take a look. Go and get Dr. Lee Osler's book on Redox Matters, and you'll gain an even more in-depth understanding of what we've talked about today. And so I would like to stop the slideshow now and just say thank you for attending this morning. And hopefully I didn't overload you with information, but my goal is not necessarily for you to learn and understand all of this if it was a bit of an overload, but to understand that the science is there. There are people who understand this science. There are reasons to want to bioreplenish with redox signaling molecules, and these redox signaling molecules, both the ones that your cells make and the ones that you replenish with from Asea, do have a significant effect on our cellular health. So thanks a lot. And if you want to share this or listen to it again, it will be available at redoxmatters.com. Click on videos and they're available on that site. Thanks a lot and have a great day and a great weekend.